Hello, my name is Dr. Paul Frank, and I'd like to thank everyone for contributing to the channel. And also, if you'd like to see more of these videos, you can like and subscribe, and then you'll be notified when we have more of these nutrition-related topics. Right now, we're going to cover why future vitamin D and COVID-19 studies may fail due to a research design. Now, what happened is I put together this video describing in detail all of the research describing why vitamin D is critical for COVID-19 and also describing the mechanism by which vitamin D deficiency leads to the clotting effect and the cytokine storm. And so it really looks real promising that more randomized control studies would turn out, really beneficial for vitamin D. But I went to the government website and looked up these trials, and I found some very disturbing issues on vitamin dosages. And so I hope by going over these specific factors that will affect outcomes that will either make better design studies in the future, or as clinicians, we can look at these studies coming out and evaluate them for why they might have failed. Well, the main thing is bolus dosing, or giving one single dose to these patients of vitamin D versus a daily dose, because that's going to be absolutely essential and critical for the outcomes. And also, are we giving adequate dosage? Are we turning on the DNA that inscribes for these survival proteins to protect us and save our life, possibly? So if your dose is not high enough, even if it's daily dose, then you're not going to have the benefits. And then I'm going to give some suggestions at the end of how researchers can set up and make sure they have a good design going into a research project. Now, if we look at this research, this is on the critically ill, vitamin D, high dose vitamin D for critically ill. If we just read this conclusion, vitamin D did not provide an advantage over the placebo. So this could have been the best well-designed trial in the world, but they made one little mistake, and that's eligible patients received a single dose, so a bolus dose of over 500,000 units of vitamin D. So what I'm going to do is go over why this probably failed. Now, a lot of this information comes from the experts, and Bruce Hollis is one of the leading experts on vitamin D, and he put out this excellent review on vitamin D and dosing intervals. And so a lot of what I'm going to be pulling together for this presentation came from his presentation. So I'd like to thank him for taking the time to put this together so we can all benefit. So why is bolus dosing much less effective than daily dosing? Because on paper, bolus dosing looks better, and here's why. So you have 0, 30 days, 60 day, and 90 day. And this is your blood lab value. So as it goes up in this direction. So a bolus dose, or giving one very high dose, so 300,000 international units given one time and one time only, will bring the lab values up to about 60 nanograms per deciliter or per milliliter. And for the first 30 days, that looks absolutely spectacular. Definitely, if you compare it to daily dose of 10,000, which is what you want to use, is 10,000 per day. Minimum of 5,000, but definitely 10,000 a day is going to be, what you want to use. But if you just look at bolus dosing, wow, in the first 30 days, that is a significant increase in blood lab values compared to giving daily. Now, then why would daily be the best than giving a bolus? Well, we're going to find out in a minute. Now, one of them is daily. You have a lot higher, you reach a higher amount, and that may be good in itself. But actually, I'm going to show where you want to give a bolus dose in the beginning. About day 5, you're going to want to give a daily dose of 10,000 IUs. But first, we've got to understand why they failed with this single dose. And again, Dr. Hollis goes through a detailed explanation of why a lot of the studies failed that had a single dose and why that is. But to understand that, whether you give a daily dose or a high dose, what's happening is that vitamin D is coming in, it's converted, and it's circulating as calcidiol or 25-OH. That's the mostly inactive form. So the blood levels of 40 to 60 is just measuring the inactive, and that doesn't necessarily mean you're switching on the genes over here. That just means you have a lab value of a certain amount. That does not tell you whether you're then further converting in the immune cell to 125-OH, which is the active, and switching on the genes and producing survival proteins. So new research is showing us that we have the ability to measure this, which is what is significant, not measuring this. Okay, so I just want to point that out in the beginning. So let's look at gene expression, which is the ultimate goal, because if you don't turn on the genes, then you don't produce these survival proteins critical for COVID-19. So let's look at 600 international units. That may go from a critical 17.1 nanograms per deciliter in the blood to 24. So that's good, you're increasing it, but you're only turning on 162 genes. Okay, so that's not very many. So the daily value doesn't really do much for you. Now, when you go to 4,000 international units, so we're getting closer to what you'd make from the sun, okay? So 4,000 is about half of what you'd make from the sun. You go from 22 to 40. Now, 40 is considered by most the lower end, that very minimal that you need, but you're turning on 320 genes. So that's better than 162. But now watch, when we give a sun dose, 10,000 international units, that's a minimum of what you should give in an experiment. You go from 17.8 to 78.6. And that kicks on 1,289 genes. Okay, so if you're trying to survive from COVID, do you want to have this many genes expressed or this many genes? Well, obviously, that's why I'm taking 10,000, because I want to make sure that my genes can turn off or on depending on what is needed by vitamin D. So at first glance, when we look at this bolus dosing, wow, we bring it up to 60 nanograms per deciliter. Well, why is that not creating good research outcomes? If we're bringing up to 60 and leaving it there for a first month, why is that not equating? Well, I'm going to show you in a minute. Just because your lab value is high doesn't mean you're turning on the genes, and that's what we need to look at. So daily dose is important, and here's why. Vitamin D3 comes in 10,000 units, goes to the liver, it's converted to its inactive form, or calcidiol, which is measured in the blood. Now, what we need to understand is 85% of that is attached to vitamin D proteins. That is attached is tightly bound, so it can't spill over into the immune cells. The rest, the 15%, is attached to other proteins. That can't spill over and turn on the genes. It's only the freely active that's able to turn on and spill on these genes. That's why a daily intake, every day bringing in a therapeutic dose or a blood or a sun dose, every day you come in here and you bring up the lab value, but every day you're spilling over the active and turning on genes. That's why you want a daily dose. Okay, now look at a bolus dose. So a bolus dose fails. Why do they fail generally? Bolus at 30,000 D3 comes in, converted in the liver. Well, it comes into the blood and it raises the blood, but to keep it from getting toxic over here, it shuttles at 50 nanograms per milliliter. The research shows at 50, it starts to shuttle the excess into the fat cells. to keep it from, getting toxic. So the majority is likely in the fat cells to avoid toxicity. So when you dump in a bolus dose, yes, it brings up the blood lab value of the inactive because it's, we're measuring, it's tied to these proteins, but it's not freely active to spill over. So the first day you might get a massive gene expression. So yes, a bolus dose is better than nothing, and it might show you in an experiment a positive result, but it's probably going to be minimal. Even if you get a positive, it's going to be minimal. Because maybe by day 5, you're only back to turning on 200 genes. So you're going to decrease the gene expression, even though the blood lab value might be at 60. So that's why it's not as effective. Now you might say, well, wait a minute. With bolus dosing, we showed great effect for bone. So why doesn't it affect the genes? Well, here's why. This blood lab value that's mostly bound to proteins, these bound proteins can affect the bone and can affect bone health because they can cross where they need to get to go, cross where and go where they need to be, and affect the bone. But these proteins can't cross and get into here. That's why you need a daily dose, and not a bolus dose works for bone, but it doesn't work for this. So that's very critical to keep in mind of why you need a daily dose. And again, he goes over this in detail, so I highly recommend his video. So what you really need is a bolus dose to bring the levels up in the blood so that you get more of the daily dose spilling over into the turning on the genetic material. So like I say, bolus dose in the beginning, and about day 5, you need to give them the bolus dose of no less than 10,000 IU. And I don't have time to go into that, but basically it's 10,000 to get those genes expressed. So now let's go to clinicaltrials.gov, and you type in vitamin D and COVID-19. I came up with 67 trials. So here we go. Intervention group, a single dose of 25,000 international units. That's how much you could make from one day. That's not even a bolus dose. That's just a single dose. 25,000 for one day of being out in the sun. That's going to do absolutely nothing for you. Nothing, zero, zilch. And you're putting together research that's not going to show anything. So I don't know if they're trying to show no results or what, but either way, they're not going to show anything. Now this is a little better. This is the name of the study, a single dose of 10,000. So remember, 10,000 only might get you up to 40 nanograms per deciliter. And you only hold that for only a short amount of time, and then you're going to go down, but you're not going to daily spill vitamin D into the immune system, which is where you need it. So this is going to most likely fail. If it doesn't fail, it's not going to get anybody excited about vitamin D because the results are going to be, just maybe if you get any result, it's not going to be worth, not near what they would have if they would have given a single dose and then followed up by 10,000 every day. That would have been a good result. Look at this, 400,000 international units, single oral dose, or 50,000 single oral. Now, which one do you think is going to get a better result? Probably this one. If there's any result at all, it's going to be this one. But what would be a better? This followed up with 10,000 every day would be a better trial, would be following it up with, a daily dose. Now look at this, randomized controlled double blind. So yeah, it's put together correctly, but watch this, one dose of 500,000 international units. Well, is this going to fail like all of the other ones that Dr. Hollis went over and described? From these bolus doses failing, because I don't care if you're looking at heart disease, cancer, whatever. If you're just doing these bolus dosing, most likely you're going to fail, although it looks good on the blood lab values. Now this is a better one. Double-blind randomized clinical trial, or blinded randomized clinical trial. Vitamin D group taking 4,000 international use orally for 30 days. Well, first of all, for 30 days, you're going to get the lab value up to about 40 nanograms in those 30 days. Are you going to spill much over in to turn on? You're probably going to turn on some genes. So you may get an inadvertent, from a bad study, you may get a marginal benefit, but nothing to get anybody excited for. You know, it's just going to probably be swept under the rug. Now, here's a better study. Bolus vitamin D, 20,000. So a sun dose for 3 days. You get a sun dose, then followed by 6,000. That's actually, it's a bare minimum. You really need to be at 10,000, but it's a bare minimum. So for 12 months, this will probably show benefit. I would say that if we look at this later, and I'll do that, I'll look at these as these studies come out. We'll look at these, a couple of years from now, and we'll see if these predictions came true. Now, watch this. Zinc and vitamin D, okay, 2,000 international units. Well, 2,000 is better than nothing. Is it going to get you up into where you're turning on your DNA? No. Should they be measuring DNA expression? That's what they should measure, because if you're not turning on the DNA, it doesn't matter what your dosage is. But the point is they're putting zinc with vitamin D. That's synergy. That's systems biology now that they're coming out with, saying, hey, vitamin D flips the switch, turns the genes on, but if you don't have zinc in the blood to modify and modify the enzymes so they actually work, then you're not going to have a good study anyway. So this is really on concept. They're giving the two together, so it's better than nothing. But I wouldn't expect much from it because they're only giving 2,000 international units. Now here's a lot better. They're giving a bolus, okay, for the study, followed by 2,000. I don't like that. 2,000, you need to be at 10,000 or at least 6,000. They give the zinc, so zinc and vitamin D. So this will probably show marginal benefit, probably not much, but at least more than the other ones. This bolus may be the kicker for making this more effective than just giving 2,000. Okay, now let's look at a past study where they looked at different dosages. Now this is what they really should be doing, is looking at different dosages, because as they went from 600 to 4,000 to 10,000, the benefit was better. It modified the bacteria in the GI tract and helped with inflammatory bowel disease at the 10,000. So that's why I say 10,000 is the minimal you should be using. Here, 10,000 for depression. Depressive symptoms were improved with vitamin D replacement. So really 10,000, if you're not working with bone, you need to be at 10,000 daily or a bolus and then 10,000. But really, you need to be measuring genetic expression. That's the end of the story, because then you know which patients are not responding. Maybe it's certain patients are not getting that, even though you're getting the same lab values, the same. So that's really where it's at, is measuring the. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to briefly go over what makes a valid study. Because if we look at randomized, controlled, double-blind, and then see it's a vitamin D and COVID study, that's not the only thing you need to look at. And so if you pick it out and say, oh, well, it showed no benefit, you need to do your homework on this. And so hopefully this will also help us clinicians evaluate research and help the researchers build better quality research projects. That's what it's about. Don't waste this money. Let's get a result with a good study. So first, they should use vitamin D3 and not D2. I don't have time to get into it, but basically D3 is the best. Was calcidiol used? Because vitamin D, gets converted into calcidiol, which is what we measure in the blood. But if they're sick, if they're, have COVID and they're severe, they need to give calcidiol, which is what they gave in the Spanish study. And that was the key to the results being so phenomenal in that study, was they gave calcidiol, not D3. But give it in the critically ill, because it's 100% absorbable. Well, what if you're had your gallbladder out, or you're not absorbing your fat? Then you're not going to absorb. So you want to maybe use calcidiol in older people in general. Was the dose therapeutic? That's not therapeutic. 4,000 on the verge of it, but 5,000 or above, 10,000 is the best therapeutic daily dose. So look at the study. Was it daily dose, weekly, or monthly? That's going to predict how many genes you're going to turn on and what you're going to affect. Bolus dose first, then daily dose. That's the best. And daily dose at 10,000, bolus dose maybe at 300,000, 200 to 300,000 would be the best. Were the blood values measured? Most of these studies, they don't even measure the inactive in the blood, but it's always nice to correlate. I like to know what the blood values were when you look at the dosage and blood values together to kind of see a correlation there. Some people have less vitamin D receptors. As we get older, we need vitamin D. So an older patient, obviously less receptors, so they might need double this dose. So that's another factor you might consider. Markers of genetic expression measured. Did they measure? This is the benchmark. If they're not measuring this, all this is just guesswork. So they really need to be measuring this to be a high quality study. Or vitamin A. Well, why is vitamin A important? Well, vitamin D turns on the genes to turn on these proteins. But if you don't have vitamin A and vitamin D together, they can't marry up and turn on the genes. So you can have all the vitamin D in the blood and it not turn on the genes without vitamin A. Well, they don't measure vitamin A levels, so you don't know. Magnesium, to get from D3 to calcidiol or to the active calcitriol, the 125, if you don't have magnesium, you can't make that conversion. So if their magnesium's low, a vitamin D study might fail. Or zinc levels. If you don't have zinc that basically runs these proteins that you make with vitamin D, then it's not going to be as effective anyway. So you need more of a systems biology approach to really any nutritional study. Were the patients overweight? That's going to affect things. Were there medications? If the patients are taking medications that break down vitamin D or decrease vitamin D's absorption, you're not going to have a good study. Do the patients have a gallbladder or irritable bowel disease, fat malabsorption? They're not, vitamin D is fat soluble. Age of the patient, older patients do not absorb. They don't make it from the skin. And what percentage of vitamin D came from the sun? Because you might have somebody on 2,000 international units, but because they're out in the sun all the time, they're really like taking 10,000. But I don't see in any of these studies where they're measuring what they get from the sun or the diet and adding that to what they're giving them. See, so the placebo could be getting more than the active. You don't know that, because they don't measure that. How much non-supplemental vitamin D did the patient receive? We have no idea in most of these studies. So these are the most common mistakes that I see in these research put together. So you might have a randomized, double-blind control, the best study, benchmark and study, but because of all these factors, you may have poor results. So hopefully this helps all of us in making better decisions in both putting together a study and evaluating a study. So thank you very much again, and like and subscribe if you want to see more of these videos. And again, I thank you very much for all the donations that have come in to make these studies possible. And the donation link is in the description. So thank you very much, and stay safe out there, everybody. Well, until next time, take care.